At the Hargrove Industries Leadership Summit, a woman stood near the back wall of the ballroom in a plain gray cardigan and dark slacks, holding a paper cup of coffee with both hands. 3 people had walked past her in the last 10 minutes. One had asked her to take a photo of him with the keynote speaker. One had handed her a coat ticket. The third, a man in a tailored navy suit with a conference lanyard still swinging from his hand, had pressed his empty cocktail glass into her free hand without slowing his stride and said, over his shoulder, "Can you find somewhere to put that?" She set the glass on the nearest table. She watched him walk back into the cluster of executives near the stage. Then she went back to reading the room. Before we go further, hit the subscribe button below and tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. 3 weeks before the summit, on a Wednesday morning in late September, Garrett Holt was in the parking lot of Ridgeline Elementary School in Knoxville, Tennessee, eating a granola bar in the cab of his truck because he had not had time to eat it at home. His daughter, age 9, was pressing her nose against the passenger window watching the school door like it might change its mind. Her name was Poppy. She had been called Peanut since the week she was born and showed no signs of outgrowing either the nickname or the nose press. "You have your lunch," Garrett said. It was not a question. "Yes." "You have your library book." "Yes." "You have the permission slip for the..." "Dad." She turned from the window. She had her mother's eyes, the precise shade of dark brown that made people think she was older than she was. "I have everything. I always have everything." "I always have everything. You got that from your mom," he said. She looked at him for a second. "I know," she said. Then she opened the door and went in. Garrett sat in the truck for another minute after the school door swung shut. He finished the granola bar. He looked at the folder on the passenger seat where the permission slip had been, which now held a different document entirely. The top page read, Hargrove Industries Community Partnership Summit. Presenter Application. Holt Family Woodcraft. Knoxville, TN. Proposed Partnership. Custom Furniture and Interior Millwork Sourcing for Hargrove Commercial Properties, Southeast Region. He had spent 11 evenings writing it. He had asked his sister-in-law, who taught English at the community college, to read it twice. He had printed it on paper he drove to the office supplies store to buy because the printer paper he kept at the shop left a faint line down the left margin that bothered him. The folder also held, paper clipped to the back, a photograph. A long dining table in a hotel lobby in Chattanooga, commissioned 2 years ago by a small regional inn that had since closed. Garrett had taken the photograph himself, standing on a step stool at the far end of the room before the hotel opened for the day. The table was 12 feet of white oak, hand-planed, the grain reading like a slow tide. He had spent 4 months on it. The inn had paid him half on delivery and the rest in 2 installments spread across 14 months. He looked at the photograph for a moment, then tucked the folder under the seat. That same morning, 40 minutes east in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of the Hargrove Tower in downtown Knoxville, Veda Hargrove was already on her second call of the day. Her chief of staff, a composed man named Fletcher who had survived 3 previous Hargrove executives and showed no signs of strain from the experience, stood near the door holding a printed itinerary for the summit. Veda had inherited the company from her father 16 months ago, under circumstances the board would have described as abrupt and she would have described as inevitable. Marcus Hargrove had died at his desk in March of the previous year, which was almost exactly the way he had said he wanted to go, though saying a thing and meaning it are different rooms. She had been running the Southeast Regional Office since she was 31. She was 38 now. She knew the numbers better than most of the board. What she did not know, and what the board spent a meaningful amount of time debating, was whether she had the presence for the rooms her father had filled. She did not argue this point. She had watched her father fill a room her entire life. She understood what was being said. What the board did not know, and what she had not chosen to correct, was that her father had spent the last 2 years of his life quietly transferring to her every relationship, every contact, and every institutional memory that mattered. Not in a document, in conversations, in the car, over dinner, in the margins of reports he left on her desk with his handwriting in the corners. He had been preparing her in the only language he trusted, which was demonstration. "The summit presenter list," Fletcher said when she ended the call. 42 applicants. "We're moving forward with 11 for the showcase. The community partnership track has 3 slots." "I saw the short list," Beta said. "Who else?" "There's a small woodworking operation out of the west side. Single owner. 1 employee. His application is unusual." Fletcher paused in the way that meant he had formed an opinion and was deciding whether she wanted it. "His samples are very good." "Schedule him last," she said. Fletcher wrote something in his folder and left. Veda turned to the window. The Tennessee River ran below, the surface picking up the pale morning light. She had eaten at a table built by a craftsman once, in a hotel in Chattanooga, on the first work trip she took after her father died. She had run her hand along the grain before the dinner service started and thought about nothing in particular, which was the closest she had come to resting in months. She had not thought about the table again until Fletcher described the application. She thought about it now. The summit was held on a Friday evening at the Hargrove Convention Center on the river, a building her father had commissioned in 2009 and which she had always found too large for the kind of conversations that mattered. The ballroom held 400. There were name tags and a string quartet in stations along the perimeter walls where the community applicants had set up small displays of their work. Garrett arrived at 6 o'clock. He wore a sport coat that fit him correctly because his sister-in-law had taken it to a tailor the month before without telling him and returned it with the receipt tucked in the pocket. He had Poppy with him because the sitter had canceled at 2 in the afternoon and there was no one else at 4 hours' notice. Poppy wore a navy dress she had chosen herself and carried a small backpack that held, she had told him, reading material and provisions, which turned out to be a library book about deep-sea creatures and a Ziploc bag of crackers. At the registration table, the volunteer coordinator smiled at Poppy and pointed her to a chair near the presenter stations with a view of the string quartet. Poppy went without complaint. She opened the deep-sea book. She ate 1 cracker. Garrett set up his display. 2 framed photographs, the Chattanooga table, and a set of built-in shelving from a law office in Oak Ridge, and 3 small sample pieces he had planed and finished himself. A square of white oak, a square of black walnut, a square of reclaimed heart pine with a knot running through it at a diagonal that he had worked around rather than away from. The room filled. By 7, Garrett had spoken to 6 people. 2 of them were other presenters. One was a man from the convention center's operations team, who asked where the restroom was. One was a woman who said, "Oh, is this for the woodworking?" and then moved on before he answered. 2 were genuine conversations, with a hotel operations manager from Chattanooga and a purchasing director from a regional restaurant group who took his card. At 7:20, he was standing at the edge of his display watching the string quartet play something he didn't know when he saw, near the back wall, a woman in a gray cardigan, standing alone with a coffee cup and the alert, still posture of someone who was watching everything and being watched by no one. He looked at her the way he sometimes looked at a piece of wood, not at what it was, but at what it was doing. She was not reading her phone. She was not scanning for someone to speak to. She was simply present in the room, and the room was moving around her the way water moves around a fixed point. He looked back at his display. Poppy had migrated from the chair near the quartet to the end of the presenter table, where she was now standing on her toes looking at the reclaimed heart pine square with the knot. "Peanut," he said quietly. "The wood has a scar," she said. "Did you put it there?" "No, the tree did." She considered this with the gravity of a scientist reviewing data. Did it hurt the tree? Knots are where branches were, where the tree was growing. So it's not a scar. She picked up the square and held it level. "It's a memory." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "That's right. Dad." She set the square down carefully. "That lady near the wall doesn't have anyone to talk to." He looked across the room. The woman in the gray cardigan was still there. Someone had just taken a photograph near her without acknowledging she was in the frame. "She might prefer it," he said. "She doesn't look like she prefers it," Poppy said. "She looks like she's just used to it." Garrett picked up 2 of the small sample squares. He looked at his daughter. "Come on," he said. They crossed the room. The woman saw them coming and something passed across her face, a readiness, he thought, for someone to ask her something useful like where the exit was. "My daughter thinks you should see these," he said. He held out the oak square and the heart pine. "She's better at explaining them than I am." The woman looked at the squares in his hands. Then she looked at Poppy, who was standing with the deep-sea book under her arm and the patient expression of a person who has made a decision and is waiting for the adults to catch up. "The one with the mark is a memory," Poppy said, "not a scar. The other one is just honest." The woman was quiet for a second. Then she reached out and took both squares. She held them the way someone holds something they want to understand, not just see. "What's the difference?" she asked. "Between honest wood and the other kind?" "The other kind tries to look like something it's not," Garrett said. "You can sand it, stain it, fill the grain. But in 20 years the floor will tell you what the tree actually was." She looked at him. "That's an unusually patient business philosophy." "Most of my clients eventually figure out they want honest," he said. She smiled, just slightly. "I'm Veda," she said. "Garrett, this is Poppy." "Hi," said Poppy. They stood for a few minutes, near the back wall. Veda asked Poppy what the deep-sea book was about. Poppy described, with significant accuracy and considerable enthusiasm, the bioluminescent organs of the anglerfish. Veda asked 3 follow-up questions, none of them condescending. Poppy answered all 3 and asked one back about whether Veda thought the anglerfish was sad to have to make its own light. Veda thought about this seriously. "I think," she said, "that it depends on whether the anglerfish knows what it's missing." At 7:45, the room lights shifted. A man at the podium introduced the opening of the formal program and asked the presenting partners to move toward the showcase area. Veda handed the wood squares back to Garrett. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm up." She crossed the ballroom floor, and people moved for her in the particular way that rooms move for one person when the room has already decided who that person is. She stepped to the podium. "Good evening. I'm Veda Hargrove, and I'd like to welcome you to the 5th Annual Hargrove Industries Community Partnership Summit." Garrett did not move. Poppy looked up from her book. "Daddy," she said, "is that her?" He was watching the woman at the podium. The gray cardigan, which he could see now, had the faint ghost of a logo at the chest, the kind that has been washed so many times it has become personal rather than corporate. Her hands on the sides of the podium were steady. Her voice was calm. She looked at the room the way she had looked at the heart pine square. Like she was trying to understand it, not perform for it. Saturday came early. Garrett was in the shop by 5:30. Poppy was still asleep, her overnight bag still packed from the night she had spent at his sister-in-law's. The dog, a 7-year-old shepherd mix named Biscuit, circled the workbench once and settled in the corner. Garrett stood in front of the long rack where he kept his reference wood, pieces he had held on to not for sale but for study. There was a board of figured maple he'd had for 6 years, waiting for the right commission. There was a slab of live-edge walnut he'd found at an estate sale and bought with money he hadn't really had. And there, behind the walnut slab, a wooden box. He hadn't opened it in a long time. He pulled it out and set it on the bench. Inside, a sheaf of design drawings. Specifications for a built-in library system commissioned in 2016 by a boutique hotel group that had subsequently been acquired and rebranded. The designs had been completed. The commission had been canceled 3 months in. He had never been fully compensated. He had kept the drawings. Beneath the drawings, a photograph. A woman sitting at a bench in a workshop, not his, but her own. A ceramic studio. Laughing at something off-frame. She was covered in clay to the elbow. The photograph was the kind taken by a person who is in love and not yet thinking about the record they are making. Her name had been Iris. She had been a ceramicist who taught part-time at the community college and made, he had once told her, the most beautifully broken things he had ever seen. She had laughed at that in the way she laughed at most things he said that he meant seriously. She had been diagnosed in the winter of their 3rd year together. She had died in the spring of their 5th. Poppy had been 4. He looked at the photograph for a while. He put it back in the box. He did not put the box back behind the walnut slab. He set it on the corner of the bench where he could see it. He pulled out the summit folder and read through his presenter notes again. Then he read through the Hargrove Industries website for the third time in a week. The company owned 43 commercial properties across the Southeast, 18 hotels, 11 mixed-use developments. The renovation pipeline was significant. The community sourcing initiative had been running for 2 years under Marcus Hargrove, and Veda had expanded the scope in the last quarter. He had not changed a single number in his bid. He had not added a footnote about his history or the cancelled commission or the 6 years he had spent rebuilding the business after Iris died. He let the proposal stand on the work. 3 days after the summit, a large envelope arrived at the shop. Inside, a handwritten note on plain paper in a compact, decided hand. Garrett, Poppy's explanation of the heart pine has been in my head for 3 days. I'd like to schedule a site visit at the Franklin Street property if you're willing. I should tell you that the anglerfish question kept me up. I'm still thinking about whether it's sad. VH. Beneath the note, a brochure for the Franklin Street Hotel. Someone had marked 3 rooms with a small penciled dot. Garrett read the note twice. He put it on the bench next to the wooden box. He looked at both of them for a moment. Then he called his sister-in-law and asked if she could take Poppy Tuesday morning. The Franklin Street property was a 12-story hotel built in 1962 that Hargrove Industries had acquired the previous year. The lobby retained its original terrazzo floor and a coffered plaster ceiling that someone in a previous renovation had painted a color it was not meant to be. The second floor held 3 event spaces that had never been reconfigured from their original layout and had consequently been underused for 40 years. The site visit was set for 9 o'clock. At 8:55, Garrett came through the front entrance with his measuring tape and a sketch pad. Veda was already in the lobby, standing near the check-in desk in a work jacket over a linen shirt, looking at the ceiling. "The paint is wrong," she said when he reached her. "Yes," he said. "My father bought this building because of the ceiling. He told me about it 3 times. I kept meaning to come see it and never did until we acquired it." She looked at him. "The terrazzo floor is original. Original and continuous. No breaks. That's unusual for a renovation of this age." She looked down. "He would have made me look at the floor first," she said. "Before the ceiling." She said it quietly, not for him. He did not answer it. They spent 2 hours in the building. She moved through the spaces the way someone moves through a room they already know, in a different way than the floor plan shows. Stopping at thresholds, standing in corners, opening doors and leaving them open to feel the proportions shift. He took measurements and made notes and asked her twice what the room was meant to do for the person who stood in it. The second time he asked, she turned from the window and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "My father used to ask that," she said. "It's the only question that matters before the rest," he said. They were standing in the largest event space when a man appeared in the doorway. He was 50-something, expensively dressed, with the kind of ease that comes from never having had to correct for a room. "Veda." He crossed toward her with a hand extended. "Douglas Crane, I've been meaning to connect since the summit." He glanced at Garrett without quite looking. "Your contractor?" "Designer," Veda said. Douglas smiled with half his face. "The Franklin Street retrofit. I've been telling the board this is a considerable outlay for what amounts to an aesthetic update. I imagine you can bring the numbers down substantially." He said this last part to Garrett. "The proposal is the proposal," Garrett said. Douglas looked at him with the patience of a man who believes patience is a form of authority. "We'll revisit." He turned back to Veda. "I'm bringing a competing group in Thursday. You'll appreciate the comparison." He left. When the corridor was empty, Veda said, "You didn't flinch." "The work is the work," Garrett said. "He outranks 2 board members," she said. "Most people in your position would have found a way to be agreeable. Most people in my position need the next job more than they need to be right," Garrett said. "I need to be right." She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the window. "What would you do with this room?" He stood beside her and looked at the space. "Leave it large," he said. "Take the partitions out entirely. Rebuild the east wall in reclaimed hardpine, same era as the hotel. Let the grain read against the plaster. The room already knows what it wants to be. It just needs someone to stop arguing with it." She was quiet for a moment. My father would have liked that answer, she said. Did he build things? He funded them. He said it amounted to the same thing if you chose carefully. That night, on the 14th floor, Veda sat alone at her desk with Garrett's proposal and a cup of tea that had gone cold. The office was dark except for the desk lamp. Fletcher had gone home. The building below was quiet in the way that buildings quiet after hours, the particular silence of a structure that has been holding people all day and has finally set them down. She had read the proposal 3 times. The numbers were honest. The material specifications were unusual, sourced with a specificity that most designers reserve for residential commissions, not commercial retrofits. The timeline was conservative and gave reasons. None of that was what had kept her at her desk until 9 o'clock. It was the line at the end of the project philosophy section. Wood does not perform. It records. The right commission doesn't ask a material to become something. It asks what the material already is. She had read a sentence like that before. She could not locate where. She opened the foundation archive on her laptop. Her father had kept a record of every grant, every commission, every community partnership the Hargrove Foundation had funded since 1987. She searched the craft and design category. 2015, a small grant to a one-person furniture studio in Knoxville for a hotel commission, listed under Community Economic Development. The recipient was listed by business name only, Holt Family Woodcraft. She sat with that for a moment. She searched further. There was a note in her father's handwriting at the bottom of the 2015 entry, scanned in with the records. Exceptional material intelligence. Commission canceled by buyer. Consider for future sourcing when Franklin Street moves forward. He had written that note 8 years ago. She had not seen it until tonight. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. She thought about a man who had answered a canceled commission by going back to the shop and starting again. She thought about her father at his desk in the house on Sequoia Ridge, moving through his ledgers with a pen, making small marks in margins that he expected no one to read until they were needed. She had asked him once how he decided who to fund. He had told her he looked for people who were still working when the reason to stop was obvious. She turned to the window. The river below had gone silver under the city lights. She did not search further. She had decided, in the time it took to look up from the screen, that she wanted to hear the rest from him. That same night, in the house on Maplecroft Drive, Poppy sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a box of colored pencils. She had been drawing for 30 minutes and had not explained what she was drawing. "Dad," she said. Garrett looked up from the big calendar. "Yeah, Peanut. Do you think the lady from the summit is lonely?" He set his pencil down. He thought about it the way he thought about grain direction. You can't force a conclusion, you have to look until it shows itself. "I don't think so," he said. "I think she's very busy." Busy isn't the same as not lonely. He looked at his daughter. "No," he said, "it's not." "Mom was busy," Poppy said. She did not look up from her drawing. "But she wasn't lonely because of us." The room was quiet for a moment, in the particular way rooms go quiet when a true thing has been said in them. "That's right," Garrett said. Poppy finished her drawing and held it up. It was the heart pine square, done in brown and orange pencil, with the diagonal knot running through it. "I'm going to send this to her," she said. "Is that okay?" He looked at the drawing. "Yes," he said, "that's okay." In the shop later, after Poppy was asleep, he took Iris's photograph out of the wooden box and set it on the shelf where he kept the tools he used most. Not hidden, not displayed, just present. 6 weeks after the summit, on a Tuesday morning in November, the Hargrove Industries Board convened on the 14th floor of the Hargrove Tower. There were 9 members at the table. Douglas Crane sat 4 seats from the head. Veda sat at the head. Fletcher sat behind her against the wall with a leather portfolio that had been assembled over 3 weeks. Douglas opened. "I want to acknowledge the work Veda has done in a demanding first year," he said, in the tone of a man who has rehearsed acknowledgement. "And I want to be direct, as this board deserves. The Franklin Street renovation as currently scoped represents a significant capital commitment for an aesthetic outcome that has not been sufficiently tied to revenue projections. I've had those concerns reviewed by an outside financial group, and I'm introducing an alternative proposal today. Trident commercial build. 26% lower. Equivalent scope. He slid a folder down the table. In addition, he said, I and 2 other minority shareholders have signed a joint motion requesting a formal review of executive strategy. We believe the board owes itself that conversation. Veda folded her hands. Before we go to any vote, she said, I'd like the board to meet the designer for the Franklin Street project. He's downstairs. She looked at Fletcher. Fletcher left. The room held the particular silence of people who have taken positions and are waiting to see if they need to defend them. Fletcher returned with Garrett, who came in carrying a flat portfolio case. He had worn the same sport coat as the summit. He looked like a man who owns one good jacket and takes care of it. He presented for 5 minutes. He did not raise his voice, and he did not introduce himself beyond his name and the business name. He spoke about the terrazzo floor and what it told him about the building's original intent. He spoke about the event spaces and the occupancy data across comparable properties that had been reconfigured versus those that had not. He set 2 photographs on the table, the Chattanooga hotel table and the Franklin Street lobby ceiling, and talked about them for 45 seconds each. Douglas smiled when he finished. Mr. Holt, I appreciate the craftsmanship perspective. The comparison bid is substantially more affordable. Would you like to address that? A chair at the far end of the table moved. Patricia Osei stood up. She was 61, a former regional director of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, whom Veda had brought onto the board 7 months earlier with the specific and unannounced intention that one day she would be needed to say exactly what she was about to say. Before this board acts on any comparison bid, Patricia said, the members should know that the Trident proposal incorporates a finishing and material specification system that is directly derived from a design methodology first documented by Holt Family Woodcraft in a grant application to the Hargrove Foundation in 2015. That application included proprietary sourcing frameworks that were never licensed to Trident or any commercial build group. She paused. I've had the Foundation archivist confirm this in writing this morning. Marcus Hargrove's personal notation on the file indicates he flagged this project for future sourcing. The board may want to consider whether proceeding with Trident creates both a legal exposure and a governance question. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when someone has said a thing that cannot be unsaid. Douglas looked at the folder in front of him. He did not look at Garrett. I'd need time to review that claim, he said. The archivist's confirmation is in the folder Fletcher just distributed. Patricia said. The motion for executive review was withdrawn before 11 o'clock. Douglas was the first person out of the room. The board members left in 1s and 2s. Fletcher closed his portfolio and stood near the wall for a moment, and slipped into the corridor behind the last of them. The boardroom door clicked shut. Veda and Garrett were the only 2 people at the long table. She did not say thank you, she said. You sat with us that night, you and Poppy. He looked at her. You came over to me, she said. You didn't have to. My daughter made the call, he said. I just carried the wood samples. She looked at the table surface between them. Your 2015 commission, she said. The one that was canceled. My father knew about it. He had it in the file. I didn't know that. He wrote a note. He said he'd intended to connect you to Franklin Street when the time came. He died before the time came. She paused. I found the note last week. I recognized your methodology from the proposal before I recognized your name. What methodology? The line about wood recording rather than performing. He was quiet for a moment. Iris wrote that, he said. My wife. She was a ceramicist. She said it about her own work and I borrowed it and never gave it back. He set his hands flat on the table. She had a degenerative illness. We had Poppy first, and then the diagnosis, and then we had 5 years. He stopped. He started again, more carefully. She kept working through most of it. She said the clay didn't know she was sick, so she could be well in the studio. She died when Poppy was 4. I spent the next 2 years not working very much. Then I spent the next 4 working very hard and not telling anyone why. Veda did not look away. I'm sorry. So am I. For your father. He was ready. I don't think I was. A pause. You keep going anyway. I had Poppy, he said. You don't stop when you have a Poppy. She almost smiled. No, I imagine you don't. He moved his hand a little toward hers across the table. He did not reach. He let it rest in the space between them. She did not move hers away. Outside, the November sky was the particular gray of a day that has not decided what it wants to do. The river ran below, slow and pewter-colored. When Veda finally came out into the corridor, Poppy was sitting on a bench near the elevator with Fletcher, eating a granola bar from her backpack and explaining bioluminescence to him with the patience of someone who has explained it before and expects to explain it again. She looked up. Hi. Hi, Veda said. My dad takes a long time sometimes, Poppy said. He does, Veda agreed. It's because he thinks before he talks. Poppy finished the granola bar. Most people talk before they think. Fletcher looked at his coffee. Poppy, Veda said, the drawing you sent me is on my office wall. Poppy considered this with appropriate seriousness. The real one, or the idea of it? Veda thought about it. Both, she said, at the same time. Poppy nodded as though this confirmed something she had suspected. You should come see the real one sometime. In the shop. I would like that, Veda said. Dad makes good chili, Poppy added. It's not weird, it's just chili. But he puts cornbread in a separate pan, which is the correct way. Garrett came out of the boardroom. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Veda. He did not say anything for a moment. Cornbread, Veda said. Separate pan, he said. Non-negotiable. The crane motion was referred to legal and ultimately dismissed 4 months later. The press attempted twice to characterize the story as a rivalry between old money and a local craftsman, and twice the resulting articles had failed to become the story they wanted to be, because neither Veda nor Garrett had said anything the reporter could hold. The Franklin Street project broke ground in January. Garrett was on site 4 days a week. He brought Poppy on Saturdays, and she had been given, by the site foreman, a measuring tape of her own and a small yellow hardhead with her name written on it in black marker. Veda came to the site on Thursday evenings after the crew had gone, not as the CEO, just as Veda. She wore the same denim jacket most weeks and carried coffee in a paper cup from a place around the corner. Garrett met her at the side entrance. They had developed a habit. She would tell him something she had decided that weekend, the reason she had decided it. He would tell her something he had noticed in the building and what it meant. They did not call these conversations anything. One Thursday in February, the temperature had dropped hard, and the wind off the river was working its way through the plywood barriers on the second floor. Poppy, in her yellow hardhat, looked at Veda and said, You should come for chili. It's a chilly night. Veda looked at Garrett. She has a meteorological system, he said. I don't fully understand it. It's cold enough, Poppy said simply. She was 9 and had no patience for unnecessary mystery. 2 days earlier, Garrett had built a low wooden step at his front door. He had not told anyone. He had built it because the front entry had a 2-inch rise that he had never thought about before he started paying attention to thresholds. Veda noticed it when she arrived. She looked at it. She looked at him. He said nothing. They ate chili with cornbread. Poppy's choice. Garrett had made it from scratch the way his mother had taught him, which took longer but was the only correct method. Veda ate 2 bowls and did not comment on the second, which he appreciated. Midway through the second bowl, Poppy fell asleep with her cheek on her forearm at the table, just as she had done twice before in her life in moments of deep comfort. Garrett stood without speaking, went to the couch, returned with a blanket, and laid it across her shoulders without lifting her head. Veda watched him do it. The way a person watches something they have been wondering about and are now no longer wondering. They sat at the kitchen table for a while after, with the heat on and the kitchen smelling of chili and wood smoke and the particular warmth of a house that has been cared for by the same hands for a long time. I have eaten dinner alone, Veda said, for most of the last 3 years. My fault with the companies? He asked. Mine, she said. I kept choosing the office. The office doesn't require anything from you at 7 in the morning. No, she said, that's the problem with it. He looked at her. "You're here now." She looked back. She did not look away. "I'm here now," she said. She did not stay. She did not need to. She put one hand on Poppy's shoulder where her hair lay against her arm. She put the other, just for a moment, on the back of Garrett's hand where it rested on the table. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. She walked out into the cold February night, and the porch light caught the frost on the brick walkway, and she stepped over the wooden threshold he had built without telling her, and crossed the yard to her car. After she had gone, Garrett picked Poppy up without waking her and carried her to bed. He sat for a long time on the edge of the mattress. Then he went to the shop. He took the wooden box down from the shelf. He took out the photograph of Iris in her studio, laughing with clay on her hands, and he set it on the shelf at eye level, in the center, where the light from the overhead lamp reached it cleanly. He looked at it for a while. Then he went back to the bench and picked up the Franklin Street plans, and he kept working. 8 months after the summit, on a Friday evening in late May, the renovated second floor of the Franklin Street Hotel opened for a preview reception. 40 guests. The east wall of the main event space was floor-to-ceiling reclaimed heart pine, the grain running horizontal, lit by narrow fixtures Garrett had spec'd himself. The terrazzo lobby floor had been cleaned and sealed. The coffered ceiling above it had been returned after considerable negotiation with the paint supplier to the original white it had been in 1962. Veda made brief remarks. She thanked the construction team, the design partners, the historic preservation consultants. She thanked Fletcher, who was standing near the wall looking at his shoes. Then she said something that had not been in the prepared remarks. "There's a person I'd like to acknowledge tonight who is listed in the project credits as lead materials designer. He will not be comfortable with what I'm about to do. I'm doing it anyway." She looked across the room. Garrett. He was standing near the east wall with Poppy beside him. Poppy had been expecting this. She knew it the way she knew most things, through a combination of observation and logic, and the particular patience of a child who has learned to trust her own read of a room. She put both her small hands on her father's back and pushed. He walked to the front. He stood beside Veda. He looked at the room for a moment. "A building holds what it lets people bring into it," he said. "This one's ready." He stepped back. The room applauded. It wasn't formal. It started in the front and moved back and gathered itself the way the right kind of applause does. Not a wave, but a reckoning. People who had been in the room for the wrong reasons began applauding for the right one. Garrett kept his eyes on the east wall, on the heart pine with its long grain and the memory of every branch the tree had grown and lost. Douglas Crane sat near the back at a table he had been given as a courtesy. He finished his water. He straightened his jacket. He walked out without incident, which was the most professionally creditable thing he had done in months. Veda stayed where she was. She held out her hand. Garrett took it. She held on through the rest of the ovation. Poppy, who had finished her second piece of cornbread from the reception table, climbed onto a chair to see better. No one told her not to. Outside, the Cumberland Gap light was going amber over the river, and the city was full of the particular early summer smell of Tennessee in May. Cut grass and river water, and something else, warm and green, that never quite has a name. The Franklin Street Hotel stood on its corner with its original terrazzo and its return ceiling and its east wall of reclaimed wood, open in the way a building is open when it has been asked the right question and answered honestly. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in November, 3 people walked through the Knoxville Botanical Garden on the South Path, which runs along a low stone wall before opening onto the formal garden with its late-season plantings and the smell of turned earth. Poppy was ahead. She had grown by her own careful measurement against the door frame in the kitchen, exactly 1 3/4 inches since the summit. She was chasing a squirrel with the calm persistence of a person who does not actually expect to catch the squirrel and is interested in the data regardless. Veda moved beside Garrett on the path. She had been offered twice in the intervening months reasons not to be here on a Saturday morning, and had declined both. "The Meridian Sourcing Group called," Garrett said. "They want to discuss a regional contract. Southeast Hotel Properties." "I know," Veda said. "Fletcher told me they reached out. I told him to say yes." A pause. A leaf came down between them from the oak overhead, a late one, and landed on the path. The Foundation archivist found the full 2015 file, Veda said. There was a second notation. My father wrote it 6 months after the first one. He said, the work outlasts the commission. Fund accordingly. Garrett was quiet for a moment. He never reached out. He didn't think it was his place, Veda said. He funded things and then let them find their way. She paused. I'm not him. I reach out. He looked at her. You reached out with a note about an anglerfish. I was building to something, she said. Poppy came galloping back from a side path with something cupped in her hands. She stopped in front of Veda. It's a seed pod, she said. She held it out. I think it's an oak. You can tell by the cap. Veda took the seed pod. She turned it in her fingers. She closed her hand around it and stopped walking. Garrett stopped beside her. I never expected this, she said. She was not looking at the garden. She was looking at the seed pod in her closed hand. To be building something on a Saturday. Neither did I, he said. I'm not good at letting things be unfinished. I know, he said. Neither am I. But some things finish in their own time. She looked at him. How do you know when? He reached over and put his hand around hers, around the seed pod, his carpenter's fingers closing over her palm. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Poppy, 5 feet ahead on the path, looked back at both of them. She assessed the situation with the sharp and generous eye of a 9-year-old who has been paying attention all year and has arrived at a conclusion. She turned back to the path and kept walking, leaving them exactly the space they needed, which was the most grown-up thing she had ever done. The garden went on around them, silver-lit and November quiet, and the stone wall ran beside the path, and the last of the season's oak leaves came down one at a time in the still air, and the two of them stood in it together. The woman who had learned to build from a man who wrote notes in margins, and the man who had learned to keep building from a woman who said the clay didn't know she was sick, holding a seed between them that neither one of them had planted, and both of them were watching grow. I keep thinking about the moment Poppy held out that heart pine square and said it wasn't a scar, it was a memory. She's 9 years old and she understood something that most adults spend their whole lives arguing themselves out of. The hard parts of us are not the parts we should hide. They're the parts that show we were actually here, actually growing, actually reaching toward something even when it cost us. Garrett didn't walk into that summit looking for a second chance. He walked in with a folder and a sport coat that fit because someone who loved him quietly took it to a tailor. He walked in with his daughter because the sitter canceled and he didn't have anyone else, and because that is what it looks like to keep going when keeping going is the only option you have left. There's a kind of integrity in that. I don't know how to name exactly. It's not heroism. It's closer to honesty. He showed up as exactly what he was. Nothing performed, nothing inflated, and he let the work speak in the same register. I think about Veda standing near that back wall while 3 people handed her their things without looking at her face. She wasn't invisible because of anything she lacked. She was invisible because the room had already decided who mattered before she walked in. That happens all the time. In rooms like that and rooms nothing like that, someone gets sorted before they speak. And the sorting is almost never about the truth of the person. It's about the speed of the assumption. What Garrett did, and what Poppy did before him and better than him, was slow down. They crossed the room not because they had calculated the advantage of it. They crossed it because a child looked at a woman standing alone and said, "She doesn't look like she prefers it. She looks like she's just used to it." That one sentence is the whole story, really. There is a difference between a person who wants to be alone and a person who has learned to make peace with being overlooked. Poppy knew the difference at 9. Most of us have to practice it. What I take from all of this, and I've been turning it over for a while, is that the life you end up building is usually assembled from things you didn't abandon. Garrett didn't abandon the craft after Iris died. He didn't abandon his honesty in the boardroom when it would have been easier and more profitable to agree with Douglas Crane. Veda didn't abandon her father's way of seeing things even when the board was questioning whether she had enough presence to fill his rooms. She had more than presence. She had the patience to read a room the way her father had taught her, and the clarity to know what it actually needed. Those three things together: the willingness to do right by people when no one is watching, the intelligence to keep asking what a room is truly meant to hold, and the stubbornness to keep working when the commission gets canceled, and the reason to stop is obvious. That's what built something worth keeping. Not any one of them alone. All three, in the same hands, over time. Poppy pushing her father toward that stage with both hands on the small of his back is the image I keep returning to. She had been watching all year. She knew before anyone else that the moment was his. She just gave him the nudge he needed to believe it. That's what the people who love us correctly do. They don't carry us. They just make sure we don't talk ourselves out of walking forward.